Welcome to the second part of our fourth lecture on recruitment and selection. In this part, I am going to discuss about selection. These are the topics which will be covered in this video. What is selection? Then the selection process, selection methods, selection tests, work samples, employment interviews, assessment centers. So we'll move on to the first topic. Basically, selection is the process by which the most suitably qualified candidate is selected from the pool of applicants for the vacant job position. And also, such selected candidate should be the person who could successfully perform that particular job and thereby add value to the organization. So therefore, it is important that the selection process is conducted effectively and efficiently. Now I will mention the steps in the selection process. The first one is reviewing applications. The second one is conducting preliminary interviews, then selection tests. After that, employment interviews, then conducting background investigation and reference checks. Then the selection decision has to be made. After that, physical or medical examination has to be conducted, and finally the job will be offered to the selected candidate. Now I will mention the selection methods which are involved in the selection process. They are applications and resumes evaluation, selection tests, employment interviews. Selection test and employment interviews will be discussed in the next slides. Then background investigation and references, that means contacting previous employers and also contacting the written references which are mentioned in the CVs likewise. Then conducting physical or medical examination to identify whether the candidate is able to perform the job duties and responsibilities and whether he possesses this like the physical ability to perform the requirements of the job. Then assessment centers, which will be discussed in the last slide of this presentation. Now let's look at the selection test which can be adopted in the selection process. Basically, employers tend to use tests for testing basic skills, job skills, and psychological aspects. However, when it comes to selection, there are several categories of tests which can be followed. They are test of cognitive abilities, test of motor and physical abilities, personality tests, interest inventories, achievement tests, situational judgment test, and web-based testing. We'll move on to the next slide. The first one is test of cognitive abilities. There are two types under this. The first one is intelligence test. They are also known as IQ test. These tests are followed to test the general intellectual abilities of the candidates. Usually these tests measure abilities such as memory, vocabulary, and verbal fluency. The second type is aptitude test. This measures the aptitude for that particular job. And also here specific mental abilities like deductive reasoning, verbal comprehension, and memory to perform that particular job are measured. The next one is test of motor abilities and physical abilities. There are certain tests to measure motor abilities like finger dexterity, manual dexterity, and reaction time. And also there are certain tests to measure physical abilities like static strength, dynamic strength, and body coordination. The next type is personality test. This is basically adapted to test the basic aspects such as attitude, motivation, and stability of the candidate. And also For this purpose, projective techniques and self-reported tests are used. Interest inventories. Under these, the individual's interests are compared with those of others in various occupations in order to determine the preferred occupation for such individual. Then under the achievement test, attempts are made to measure the candidate's current job knowledge in areas like marketing, production, or human resources. Then under situational judgment test, it assesses the candidate's judgment regarding a situation which encountered or which he came across in the workplace. Under work samples, the performance of the job applicant is tested through actual job tasks involved in the job for which he has applied. Then, therefore, the work sampling technique attempts to predict the performance of the candidates by requiring them to perform sample job tasks. Now let's look at the employment interviews. These interviews can be conducted either as structured interviews or unstructured interviews. Structured interviews are also called as directive interviews. Here, the interviewer follows a set of predetermined questions and they will be close-ended questions. And also, the most important thing is all the candidates will be asked the same questions and the evaluation criteria is developed in advance. On the other hand, unstructured interviews are called as non-directive interviews. Here, the interviewer does not follow a set format of questions and they are not prepared in advance. And also, these questions will most probably be open-ended ones. Then, the interviewer will ask questions depending on the candidate's personality and also depending on his interests. Now, let's look at the interview content. The interview questions will be prepared in accordance with the interview content. The first one is situational interview, then behavioral interview, job-related interview, and finally stress interview. We'll go one by one. The first one is situational interview. Here the questions will be asked to identify how the candidate will behave in a given situation. Then behavioral interview. Under this, the questions will be asked to identify how the candidate have reacted to actual situations in the past. Under job-related interview, questions will be asked to identify how the candidate's job-relevant past experiences are. And lastly, stress interview. Here the questions will be asked in a manner which will make the candidate uncomfortable and thereby identify sensitive candidates and the stress tolerance capacity of each candidate. Now let's look at the ways of conducting interviews. The first one is unstructured sequential interview. Here each interviewer makes an independent opinion after asking different questions from the candidate. The second one is structured sequential interview. Each interviewer rates the candidate by using a predetermined set of questions and on a standardized evaluation form. The third one is panel interview. This is also known as board interview. Here each candidate is interviewed by a group of interviewers and their rating are combined together to create the final panel score for each candidate. The fourth one is mass interview. Here several candidates are interviewed at the same time by a panel. The fifth one is computer-based interview. Computerized oral, visual or written questions are given to the candidate for which such person will respond either orally or through typed answers. Other than these, there are some other interviews as well. They are phone interview and web-based video interview. Now let's look at how an effective interview can be conducted. I have included 11 points. The first one is understand the job duties and base the questions on those actual duties. Use questions relating to job knowledge, situations and behaviors. Develop an objective evaluation criteria. Ask the same set of questions from all the candidates. Prepare several ideal answers and a score for each question. Utilize well-trained interviewers. Get organized or prepared for the interview. Establish rapport. That means greet the candidate in a proper manner. Then ask the questions you prepared at the beginning. However, you can include new questions as well depending on the situation. Then take brief notes during the interview. Through that, you can use those brief notes when you make the final decision. Then control and review the interview. Now let's look at some common errors that undermine the usefulness of an interview. The first one is first impressions. Here, jumping into conclusions, making snap judgments about candidates during the first few minutes of the interview or even before the interview begins could happen. This could be unfavorable for the candidate when the prior information about him is negative. Then the second one is misunderstandings about what the job requires. When the interviewers do not have an accurate idea about what the job requires and what sort of a person should be hired, then it results in them making their selection decisions based on wrong impressions or stereotypes. Third one is candidate order error. Here an error of judgment occurs due to the order in which the candidates are interviewed. Then nonverbal behavior and impression of management. The candidate's nonverbal behavior can largely impact the interviewer's rating on such candidate. And also, clever candidates attempt to manage the interviewer's impression on them. The fifth one is effect of personal characteristics. Personal characteristics such as physical attractiveness, gender, race, and even disabilities could affect this. The interviewer's behavior. This also affects the interviewee's performance and rating. For example, talking too much without letting the interviewee to give his answers. I have mentioned 5 mistakes which could occur during interviews. They are showing up too late or too early, talking too much, not enough or too much eye contact, and not being properly prepared for the interview in advance. And finally, I will briefly explain what are assessment centers. In simple terms, it is a 2 to 3 day simulation program in which around 10 to 12 candidates are asked to perform certain realistic tasks under the observation of trained assessors who will assess the abilities or developmental potential of those candidates in order to determine whether they are suitable for a particular job position. For this purpose, several simulated tasks can be followed. They are testing, interviews, individual oral presentations, leaderless group discussion, in-basket exercises, and lastly, management games. Through assessment centers, appraise and feedback will be given with regard to each candidate's leadership potential, strengths, and weaknesses. And some of the advantages of assessment centers are there are multiple assessors, so therefore the possibility of biasness is low. And multiple methods are followed. Then some of the disadvantages are it is expensive to develop and conduct the simulated task. Then it is time consuming. So with that we come to the end of our lecture on recruitment and selection.